You were told they came from a shipwreck. Portuguese sailors, so the story goes, cast onto the Gulf Coast, who married into the frontier and disappeared into the Louisiana pines. It's a beautiful story, passed down for 200 years. And it's the wrong one. For generations, the people called Redbones lived in the piney woods of western Louisiana and eastern Texas, copper-skinned, dark-eyed, hard to place. Their neighbors couldn't agree on what they were. Some said Portuguese, some said Spanish, or Moorish or Turkish. Others insisted they were pure Cherokee or Choctaw, native people hiding under a strange new name, and the law had its own word for them, not white, not black, not Indian. Something in between, something it couldn't file. Every one of those answers was confident. Every one of them was passed down as fact, and not one of them was true. Today, court records that sat forgotten for a century and DNA drawn from their descendants tell a different story, a harder one, a more human one, because the truth about the Redbones isn't a shipwreck, it's a decision made by people who had everything to lose. To understand the Redbones, you have to understand the ground they stood on, literally. In 1806, the United States and Spain could not agree where Louisiana ended and Texas began, so they agreed on nothing. They drew a line around a strip of land between the Sabine River and the Arroyo Hondo and declared it neutral. No army, no sheriff, no courthouse, no law. They called it the neutral strip. The locals called it no man's land. For 15 years, it was exactly that, a lawless corridor where the two great powers of the continent simply looked away. And into that gap came people who needed a place where no one was asking questions. Debtors, fugitives, deserters, and families of mixed ancestry who had learned the hard way what happened when the wrong authorities started counting. The neutral strip did something to the people who settled it. It sealed them in, cut off from the towns, marrying mostly among themselves for generations. The founding families passed the same handful of bloodlines back and forth over and over until a whole community carried the mark of just a few ancestors. Geneticists have a name for this. They call it the founder effect. A small group, isolated long enough, becomes a kind of living fingerprint, their traits concentrated, their signal preserved, like a message sealed in a bottle and buried in the swamp. But here is where the story turns strange. On paper, many of these families were white. They owned land, they voted, their children went to school. And yet, again and again, someone would challenge them. In 1830, Louisiana passed a law barring free people of color from even entering the state. Suddenly, what a family was called wasn't a matter of gossip, it was a matter of survival. And in the years that followed, according to history still being pieced together from parish records, Redbone men were dragged into court, accused of voting illegally because someone claimed they were of color. The cases were fought. The verdicts, by these accounts, came back in their favor. On paper, they stayed white. But think about what that means. A community whose very right to exist as citizens had to be defended in a courtroom against their own neighbors. So which was it? Were they the white landowners the court confirmed? The colored outsiders their accusers swore they were? The lost Portuguese of the family legend? Or something the records had never learned how to name? For 2 centuries, no one could say for certain. And if you have ever felt your own family's story didn't quite add up, stay with me, because this next part is exactly why. The blood knew. It just couldn't speak yet. Then the tools changed. Genetic genealogy gave researchers 3 instruments, each reading a different page of the body's archive. Autosomal DNA, the full mix, every branch of the family tree bleeding together, measures overall ancestry. Y-DNA follows one line only. Father to father to father, straight back through the centuries. And mitochondrial DNA does the same for the maternal line, mother to mother to mother, into deep time. Point those instruments at communities like the Redbones, and the shipwreck dissolves. Start with their closest cousins, the Melungeons of Appalachia, a tri-racial community wrapped in the very same legends: Portuguese, Turkish, pure Indian. For years, those myths held. Then, in 2011, a major genetic study read their direct lines. The paternal lines came back European and African. The maternal lines, tested one after another, came back European. The exotic origins, the Turks, the lost Portuguese, the pure native bloodline, simply weren't there. What was there was quieter and heavier. The descendants of African men and European women joined in the colonial South, generations before anyone thought to invent a prettier story. The evidence points the same way for the Redbones. Their roots trace not to a Mediterranean shipwreck, but to free people of color, families formed in the earliest English colonies, often from the unions of European women and African men, free and enslaved. From Virginia and the Carolinas, they moved south and west, ahead of tightening racial law, until they reached the one place that wasn't counting: the neutral strip. They settled 10 Mile Creek, Bearhead Creek. They crossed the Sabine into Texas. And their blood carried three streams, braided together: European, Sub-Saharan African, and Native American. That's what the science calls tri-racial. That's what the founder effect preserved, sealed in the swamp for 200 years. Now, I want to be honest with you about the limits here. No single peer-reviewed study has drawn one Redbone family, tested them cohort by cohort, and closed the book. The genetic work on these communities is still being done, carefully and alongside their descendants. But every honest thread, the court records, the census pages, the DNA of their neighbors, the DNA of their cousins, pulls in the same direction. And it pulls away from the shipwreck. Here's the part that should stop you. Louisiana, the line between white and black on paper, was never the same as the line in the blood. Families recorded as white for generations carry African and Native ancestry to this day. The Redbones weren't an exception to the Southern racial order. They were the proof it never really worked. So why the shipwreck? Why Portugal? Because the myth was armor. Put yourself in the Louisiana of the one-drop rule, where a single documented African ancestor could cost you your land, your vote, your children's schooling, your freedom itself. Now imagine you have copper skin and straight dark hair, and a neighbor with a grudge and a long memory. What do you say? You say Portuguese. You say, my grandmother was Cherokee. You reach for any origin at all. That explains the face in the mirror without surrendering everything that face could cost you. The Portuguese myth was never just ignorance. It was a shield. A story precise enough to survive a census taker and dignified enough to survive a courtroom. These families weren't lying to feel special. They were lying to stay free. And across 3 centuries, the paperwork on the very same people changed with the winds of power. Free-colored in one era, white in the next, mixed when a company wanted to break a union and needed a word to strip a man of his standing. The label was never really about them. It was about who was holding the pen. DNA doesn't erase that story. It honors it. Because what the science finally reveals is larger than any single myth and truer than all of them. The Redbones were not a shipwreck. They were not a hidden tribe. They were a people who braided 3 continents into one bloodline, who found a lawless strip of swamp and turned it into a refuge, and who guarded their place in the world with the only weapon they were allowed to carry: a story. Their history isn't written in a ship's log. It's written in the body. An archive of survival, passed hand to hand, generation to generation, waiting for a language that could finally read it. That language is here now, and it doesn't call them Portuguese or Indian or colored or white. It calls them survivors. So here's where I turn it over to you. If your family carries one of these stories, a Portuguese sailor, a Cherokee grandmother, a name nobody in town could quite place, I want to hear it. Drop it in the comments. Give me the surname, give me the county, give me the version you grew up on. Because this channel has never been about me handing down answers from on high. It's about us, digging through the records together, one family, one bloodline at a time. Thank you all for watching. Please jump into the comments with any of your questions, any of your thoughts, and if this is the kind of digging you want to keep doing, subscribe and stay with me. There is a lot more of this buried out there, and we're only just starting to pull it up.